aircraft. It was 1983. And one of the gentlemen on the stage with me today was probably on that plane. I was in Albany, New York, and I was 11 years old, and I was doing my favorite thing to do, ride the bike to the airport and go and watch the airplanes. And that particular day, President Reagan and President Herbert Walker Bush were coming to Albany because there was a campaign going on. And I looked out there and I saw Air Force One out there and I thought, oh my gosh, this is incredible. That's the President of the United States and he's here in Albany, New York. Wow. Well, what I didn't realize that so many years later, I would be setting my foot on one of those blue and white airplanes and then going on to spend 17 years there. So we are honored. Again, good morning. Thank you to all of our volunteers and helpers, and especially Sarah and Nicholas Inman for putting on the Missouri Cherry Blossom Festival. We're so happy that you're all here. This is always the highlight of my year. So, and I'm very honored today because I get to be on stage with two of my Sam Fox brothers. One is a legend in the aviation history of the Air Force, and that's the gentleman to my far left, Chief Master Sergeant retired, Howie Franklin. The only flight attendant to have served 5 consecutive presidents without The gentleman to my immediate left is very special to me because the very first time that I got to set foot on the airplane that we know as Air Force One was September 2005. I had been flying for a couple of years on the Gulf Streams with the First Lady and the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense and lots of the cabinet members and all the those kind of people. And Air Force One came calling. And as they do, they go within the squadrons on Andrews and they pick out some people that they think might work on the airplane. So they brought me out to the squadron and I got to meet this gentleman right here. And he was my first instructor that day. President and Mrs. Bush were going to the opening of the Lincoln Library in Springfield, Illinois. And I have an honor of introducing Master Sergeant retired Jeffrey Elder. I can still see Jeff straightening the seatbelts out on Air Force One, bending down, going, this is how we do it on Air Force One. I don't know how y'all do it over there on the other side of the base. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. We're honored to have you and for you to tell your story. So tell us, Jeff, how did you find the Air Force from Niagara Falls, New York?
Okay, so first of all, good morning, everybody. And the first thing I always like to do is give honor to God for giving me the opportunity to have such a wonderful career. He has watched over me for a long time, and I'm so thankful for that. And thankful for being able to tell you all of that. So as a young, I graduated on June 1st of 1980, and then I found myself at Lackland Air Force Base on the 1st of August, 1980. Had no clue what was to come, but I knew I wanted to be in the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force. I joined the Air Force as a firefighter, crash, fire, and rescue. My first duty station was in Germany. I went to Germany, spent 18 years old in Germany. It was wonderful. Got to spend 2 years over there. Then I came back close to home, Hancock Field in Syracuse, New York, which is an hour and a half away from my home in Niagara Falls. And then I went to Homestead in Florida. After being there for just a little time, the snow in New York was so much. They said, well, we'll send you to any tactical air command base you want to go to. And I saw Homestead south of Miami. I was like, Homestead, send me there. So I went down there, and that's the first time I saw that blue and white jet. Vice President Bush at the time would always come down and go on vacation. So they said, hey, see those guys in those nice three-piece suits? I'm in a fire truck with my fire bunkers on. And the guy in the truck says, you see those guys in those nice three-piece suits? I said, yeah. He said, they're Air Force just like you. And I looked at them. I said, what do? Do they go to work looking like that? And I go to work looking like this. I went out and talked to them, and they told me about it. And next thing you know, that's history.
Chief, tell us how you got started, and what year was that you went in the Air Force?
Well, the Commandant of the Marine Corps one time asked me, he said, Howie, why the heck did you join the Air Force? Commandant of the Marine Corps. I said, well, sir, I said, in 1965, I was 20 years old and I got drafted. I was living on the South Shore of Long Island in a town called Bayport. that was fantastic. I mean, life was wonderful. All of a sudden, I get a draft notice that said, immediate induction when passing physical. So I said to the general, I said, well, sir, he said, I figured out that the United States Air Force was the only armed forces, in all respect to all the other armed forces now, but it was the only armed forces at the time that the enlisted man was not the primary resource to get shot. In the Air Force, they shot the officers. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps laughed just like you, and he said, I never thought of that. I said, I did. So that's how I got in. And I didn't like it. I mean, I didn't like the military, I didn't like the Air Force. I put in for food service because I was supposed to, I had worked at a private yacht club for the jet set, like the 1%ers of today, and I worked for a lot of chefs and planned meals and things of that nature, and one of them was a Greek chef, and he worked for the Greek International Lines, and he told me about the world, and I said, I want to go see the world. And so I joined the Air Force. I told the man of the Greek International Lines that I'm going to go in the Air Force for 4 years in food service. When I come out, get a better job with him. And he said, fine. It was a big deal to him, big deal for me, nothing for him, you know. So I went in the Air Force to do that. Didn't like the Air Force. Didn't like food service. We would the guys that worked at the treatment plant for refuge or things like that were held in higher esteem than the food service people. So when I end up in South Dakota, I end up in Guam, and I was able to get into the in-flight kitchen, and flight crews came in, they liked me. And they asked me if I would like to cross-train. I said, what do I got to do? He said, do you want to be a flight attendant? I said, what's a flight attendant do? And he told me, take care of the general, take care of the passengers. Well, I said, I can do that. Well, what else do I have to do? So you're going to have to extend 8 months in your career over your 4-year term. I said, you got the wrong person. So they must have liked me. So they said, well, we'd like you to put you on one flight to see how you like it. We left Guam and went to Okinawa, then went to Taipei at the time of my life. But the key was that the crew members, now that I'm working for, they all liked what they did. So they appreciated what I did. Because I'm from Long Island, New York. I made them a sandwich this thick, and, you know, they had never had, they used to slice a ham and a slice of cheese on a sandwich. So they liked me, and I ended up coming over, but that's basically how it started.
So I should preface it by, you know, we all started our Air Force journey in another career field. Myself, I was a supply person, and Chief was in food services, and Jeff was a firefighter. So we were all doing our thing and not knowing ever that there were Air Force flight attendants, that there were Air Force crew members on board those airplanes out of Andrews doing those jobs. And it was only by way of what they just talked about that we found out about the career field. And myself, I was sitting on grave shift in England on the third of my 5 years there, and I got a call from Roland Paramore, who was my old supervisor, who was up on Air Force One. And he says, hey, what are you up to? I said, oh, I'm just over here in England. I've been here 3 years, and I'm gonna be, here for at least 5 years. I just met a girl, and I'm happy, and things are good. And he goes, well, we're gonna be coming through with the First Lady. I said, what are you talking about, First Lady? And he's like, I mean, the First Lady, like Laura Bush? And he was like, yeah. He said, we're gonna be coming through, and we'd like you to come out and maybe check us out and see the airplane. I said, oh, great, I get a tour. And he's like, well, you might want to think about another career field. Well, Roland was in supply like me. I said, well, what are you doing? He's like, I'm a flight attendant. I said, you're a flight attendant? Now, you know Roland, if you knew him, he's a big muscle guy, black guy. And I'm like, you're a flight attendant? And he goes, yeah, it's not like that. Come out and see the plane. Well, I saw that blue and white airplane as you guys came through Mildenhall, and I fell in love. And I got hooked, and that was my journey. That then began my journey in 2003 to Joint Base Andrews, where I spent 17 years flying on those beautiful airplanes in 3 different administrations. So it was an incredible journey, and people like Chief Franklin really, we stood on their shoulders to rise up and watch history unfold. I call it flying through history. So these 2 gentlemen have written books, and you'll be able to see those books out there and get them signed. And I tell you, you got to read them because they're amazing, amazing stories. I wrote my book a few years ago, and I'm not going to publish it for several years because I'm not ready to publish it yet because I still work and I don't want to get in trouble. So, but it's going to be called Flying Through History. So don't y'all steal that and copyright it because I haven't copyrighted it. I can't afford to copyright it yet. But that's what we get to do. We get to watch history unfold right in front of our eyes. And I think as 3 retirees now, I think they'll tell you the first thing we miss is the people, and the second thing we miss is being a part of the action.
Family.
And family. So Chief, tell us, 5 presidents. Who was your first? And tell us a story.
Yeah, I worked for President Ford. I worked for President Ford as vice president, but I also flew with him as a congressman, and then I got promoted to Air Force Two under Spiro Agnew, who was a great guy to fly for, but he got lost his job. And then I worked for Ford as a president, and President Carter, and then I worked for President Reagan and President Bush and President Clinton. He's guilty, but he's a nice guy. I'd like to say, when they say the term flight attendant, if you relate to a flight attendant in the airlines, it has nothing to do with it. That's just a term. Air passenger specialist, they used to call us. Rich is a hotel manager of a hotel that travels throughout the world, responsible for all the services that's on that airplane at all times. Generals have come to me and said, the flight attendants, the non-flight attendants, when they get out of service, they're more successful than most people. Well, he had to get things done. He had to move things, and all kinds, from food to service to luggage to baggage and the whole picture. And these 2 guys, you know what this is? That's the lower left-hand corner of the big picture. That's what most people see. These guys see the big picture, and they had to react to it.
Thank you, Chief. Jeff, what about you? Your first president was President Clinton, right?
No, actually, it was President Bush.
President Bush.
So
that's
41,
right.
42,
There you go.
43.
There you go.
So my first flight, it was what they called Air Force 1.5. We actually flew President Bush to Georgia. So we had a smaller plane package, and that was outstanding. But my first time that I actually got on the big jet, Air Force One, I was the captain of the Air Force racquetball team. And Air Force One was asking me, Jeff, would you like to come fly with us? And I was like, yes, I'd love to come fly with you. Well, the first time they offered, I'm at the national championships in racquetball down in Texas. And they're like, Jeff, can you fly with us tomorrow? I was like, I've been waiting on this opportunity for so long, and I'm kind of out of pocket right now. I'm at the national championships. Well, just do good and then come back and let us know when you're back. So I did good, brought a medal back, and then when I came back, they let me fly with them, and it was the most outstanding thing in the world, and I knew I was hooked. So that was it for me.
Second president, Chief.
Yeah, well, President Ford now I want to say something that President Ford said to me, and I'm trying to keep it clean.
We're in church.
Yeah. He said to me, and I use this throughout my life, he said, be careful of the toes that you step on that may be connected to the next butthole that you got to kiss. Went on, and President Carter, my first relationship to a gentleman from the South. He was a tremendous educator. He was like a great teacher. He shared history. He would spout that he was a Christian, and we really appreciate that. And I'll jump to one other thing. Believe it or not, I have witnessed every one of the presidents, including Bill Clinton, by themselves reading the Bible. Every one of those presidents. Now, they weren't doing it in front of me or in front of someone. They were reading the Bible because they wanted to read the Bible. That was a blessing to me. And again, if you get into my book, you'll see, as Jeff said, God placed me in these situations. I wasn't planning on going there, and he opened the door, and then I got shoved in, and that's the way it happened. Anyway, President Carter and Mrs. Carter, tremendous people traveling all around the world.
We have some Carter family here with us here in the audience.
I'd like to tell a short story about Mrs. Carter. See, I flew with Mrs. Carter tremendously because President Carter reduced his campaigning because the Ayatollah had our hostages. So Rosalind Carter went out on a campaign trail. They split me and this guy named Denny Stump off from the Air Force One, and we flew with the First Lady. So one trip I'd fly with him, and Denny would fly with the next one. And this is a touching experience. We'll keep it clean. We were going up to, I shared this with Rosalind's sister the other day, and she laughed. We were going up to Maine to campaign. That means she was going out and press flesh. That means shake hands and try to win votes for her husband. It was 26 below zero in Maine that day, and my responsibility is running the airplane. And we got there, and I go to get her coat out of the closet to help her with the coat. It's a heavy suede coat, full length, made in Afghanistan, fleece lined inside and full suede on the outside. Weighs at least 5 pounds, if not more. I stood behind this gracious, wonderful Southern lady, and I'm holding her coat, and accidentally, as she put the sleeves in the coat, she hit me right in the groin. Now, this Southern genteel woman, Christian, it was an accident. We looked at each other, we both turned a little red. There was a lot of nonverbal communication going on, and I was agreeing with everything she said. I came home that night and shared it with my wife, and my wife said, well, that was a touching experience. 2 days later, I'm on a campaign trail trip again. It's like if you play golf, you hit a bad ball, you got to forget about it. Well, when I'm on a mission, whatever happened 2 days ago is completely out of my mind. I have a mission today. We're going back up to Maine, and my responsibilities, my reputation is on the line, and I got to do this job. We get to the first stop. It's also Maine. It's cold. She has a different coat. I don't even think about it. I go get her coat out of the closet. I stand behind her, this time further back. And this is an example of how gracious she was. Stood further back, I put the coat over her, and she turned to me gracelessly and said, Howie? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, you notice now I have a caped coat? So the lady saw a problem and solved the problem.
So now Herbert Walker Bush did not like broccoli. We know that. He didn't want any broccoli served on board the airplane. And the airplane that you saw that we call Angel and that you know as Air Force One, which is going to be eventually retiring, was President Herbert Walker Bush was the first president to fly on that airplane. It was ordered under the Reagan administration. It took a few years to build up at Boeing and then delivered in the Bush administration. So nobody ever mistakenly gave him broccoli, right?
No, well, yeah, he handled that very well. He said, Bush said, I don't like broccoli. My mother made me eat broccoli. I'm the president. I'm not going to eat broccoli. And Mrs. Bush said, I like broccoli. I think it's very good for you. So they went on both sides of the fence. It turned out pretty good. I had to answer a question that said, did the president tell you directly not to serve a broccoli? And I said, I can neither confirm or deny.
So Jeff, tell us about the transitioning. Tell us about the transitions from one campaign, because that's a lot of people. I get a lot of questions of, well, when that president leaves, do you all leave too? No, we stay on because we are apolitical and we serve the seal and we serve the office. And I think if most people kind of kept that in the back of their mind, they would see it differently.
But
Chief?
Rich, up until the Carter administration, they changed crews every time.
Ah.
And President Carter is the one that's kept the crew for continuity.
We love the Carters, don't we? we love the Carters. Jeff, tell us about the changeover from administrations and what's that like? And then, Chief, I want you to answer that same question since you had so many changeovers.
So basically, the best thing about the Air Force One crew, when you get invited to be a member of the crew, when I first got hired, Colonel Denny Barr, he said, Jeff, we'd like to know if you'd like to be a member of the Air Force One crew. And when I said yes, he said, well, welcome to the Air Force One family, no inbreeding. I was like, okay, I understand that, sir. So, but the great thing about it was, no matter what your political affiliation was, everyone was the best of the Air Force. So when we came together, we had a job to do. The last administration, thank you. We'll see you later. Thanks for all the memories. The new administration, come on in. we have a lot to learn about you, because our job is all about making sure that you're as comfortable as you can be and as safe as you can be, and letting you know that you can rely on us to be there for you. So it was just wonderful.
And it's also, it's very poignant sometimes doing the last flights. I have been a part of several last flights, and the Obama's last flight, they were going out to Chicago to give his goodbye to America speech. The president was on board Air Force One. I had the First Lady on board one of our other airplane. So we flew out to Chicago, and it was a party. We had Beyonce playing on the airplane. We had a wonderful cake for her. And I just have to tell a quick story, because we brought the cake up to the DV compartment, the VIP compartment where the First Lady was. And the aide said to me, "Do you have a knife?" And I thought, yeah, I have a knife. So I go in the back and I grab a butcher knife and I come up to the front. And the White House photographer is there, and he takes a picture. And the picture, which now I look at it and think, it's Mrs. Obama, the cake, and me with a butcher knife like this. That could never happen anywhere else except for on our airplanes. But it was an amazing party going out, and then the First Lady then went on to New York City, where she was appearing on The Tonight Show. But going into Washington after that, that particular flight, it was somber. Because, you know, they were happy because the First Lady and the President were leaving office and they were going on to retirement, but everybody else was out of a job on board that airplane, pretty much, if they weren't going on to another thing. So it became a somber moment. But Chief, you went through so many different changes of administrations. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, one thing the mission of Air Force One is to provide secure and safe air transportation for the President, primary mission. Second mission for the airplane and the crew is to provide all the services that the White House would provide for the President only while he's on the road and traveling around the country. Richard and Jeff's and my position was to provide a professional but comfortable atmosphere on Air Force One, and that was the goal. We want you to, what you're going to feel like tonight when you get home and you take your shoes off, we want you to feel comfortable on that airplane. And we also, when we left China or we left somewhere, you felt like you were now getting on the airplane, you were back in America, so to speak. And the transitioning, like you said, I salute the Carter family for keeping us, because if you can imagine the continuity change, you have a brand new administration that's getting used to this whole thing, and now you have a brand new crew that never did it before. So the continuity was very worthwhile for everybody. But the transitions are, you know, I took George Bush back to Texas after he left office. That day, it was very melancholy, but Mrs. Bush was very happy. She was the cheerleader of the family. Mary Madeline, who ran the campaign for the Bushes, said, the only person in the whole Bush administration that we respectfully feared was Barbara Bush. Because she expected you to be professional. And if you weren't, she's going to tell you where you can go to get professional.
When President Obama left office, and then on Inauguration Day, we brought the Trumps back to New York City. Of course, the president stayed in Washington, but Mrs. Trump, Barron, was finishing school, so she went on back to New York City until he was finishing school. So we took them back on that flight, and I remember them getting on board, the entire Trump family, with the kids and grandkids and everybody else. And the First Lady came aboard, and she said, "Where do I sit?" Where can we sit? Ma'am, you can sit anywhere you like. This is your plane, you know. But it is amazing because they are just in awe as we are to see the airplane for the first time, to be on board the airplane for the first time, because it's so historical. When you see that blue and white aircraft that you see as Air Force One, it's actually not Air Force One unless the president is on board. And Jeff, tell us about the call sign and what that means. And from the moment that we have that 15-minute flight from the West Lawn at the White House to touchdown at Andrews, and when they make the call, the president's on board, we're now Air Force One.
Well, I think Chief could really expound on that a little better, because I'll tell another story. But
Well, yeah, the airplane's got to be ready 1 hour prior. We're ready to go, just in case. And then the helicopter ride, like you said, is 15 minutes. And what I would say, the way I tried to do it is with my employees, with the people on the airplane, with the people that we hired. I got in trouble once in a while with the higher echelon because I didn't hire all 10s. I was looking for people, you know, in elementary school, they get this little block. Do they play and work well with others? you're going to be on an airplane for a long time. You got to be able to do that. So, you know, it's imperative. We spent long hours on that airplane, and to still be pleasurable and friendly with your coworker is very important. One bad apple, one person with a bad attitude in an organization can lower the productivity of the whole organization. And that was something that I really was aware of. So like, can you imagine me putting 18 10s on there? They're going to be killing each other because they're competitive. So
Type A personalities.
absolutely.
Type A personalities. Jeff, you have a story that you'd like to share.
Yes. So, of course, flying on Air Force One, every flight, every time the plane took off and landed, is history. So I'm a big history buff, so I wanted to be a part of every flight that I can. So we had a situation where my wife was pregnant, and she was a week and a half out. So in 1996, one of the biggest things that was going on in that year was the Olympics in Atlanta. So the president was going to go down and open up the Olympics, and I was like, I got to be a part of that. Okay, so I tell my wife, I say, hey, look, it's a day trip. I just want to go down for the day. I don't know. I was like, you're a week and a half out. No problem. Okay, I had my 16-year-old nephew was there helping out and everything. We got this. So we fly down to Atlanta, and they gave us the crew rooms for the day. So I'm with another guy, but we're out visiting Atlanta, seeing all the Olympic stuff. My beeper goes off from the White House that says, your wife's water broke at Walmart. No. Okay. So I'm like, okay, so they're taking it to the hospital and everything on base in Andrews. So we could go through the day and everything. And one thing that you might have found out about President Clinton, very charismatic, very popular. So lots of times we were running a little bit late. Always. I'm being politically
Chief says
correct.
always.
So
Hey, we have a Clinton family member in here, so we got to be careful.
Yeah. So we're going through the day, and so the crew is getting ready to go back to DC, and so we're just a little late. So when the president finally comes back to the aircraft, Chelsea and Hillary come up the plane, and I'm working the forward galley, so she walks in and she sees me. She's like, I hear someone's in labor. And I was like, yes, ma'am. So she starts talking to me about when Chelsea was born and everything. So then President Clinton, he finishes downstairs, and then he comes upstairs, and he looks up at Colonel Barr. He says, hey, let's get this plane back so this man can get back for the birth of his child. So then he's talking to me about when Chelsea was born and everything. So usually from Atlanta to DC is an hour and a half. That night we made it in an hour and 5 minutes. And it was raining cats and dogs when we landed. So then, President Clinton was in the conference room. And then after we land, so then he comes walking by, and I'm standing in the forward galley. He said, Jeff, what are you still doing here? I said, Mr. President, protocol. You leave and then we leave. He said, get out of here. So I look up at my colonel. He says, you heard the man. I run down the stairs. They had a car waiting for me. The car whisked me over to the hospital on base. I get to the hospital, and I'm running through the hospital like OJ in the airport. I get to the room, and I open up the door, and I hear, eh, and I'm like, and I get this look I will never forget. And I'm like, oh no, what do we have? And my wife says, we have a girl. And I was just so blessed, and I was so happy with that. But we landed at 1:10. My daughter was born at 1:15, and I got there at 1:20.
Wow, amazing. Amazing. Chief, you were a part of some really historic trips. We've all been a part of them, but you were really a part of some of which we saw on that film. I mean, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall and all of that. So talk about probably, one of your most favorite historic trips that you did.
Well, that one in Berlin, yes, it was. We were there, and I want you to know that I know people that's involved in writing the speeches. Tear down the wall was put in the speech by the president. The State Department took it out. He put it back in. They took it out. And when he went on the podium to give the speech, it was not in the speech. he put it back in. I'd like to give it a little, I want you, everybody's real people. You know, even the presidents, we put them on a pedestal just like actors and things of that nature. A little family type story. The Bushes had two dogs, Ranger and Millie. Millie was the mother, Ranger was the son. And the only time the dogs were on the airplane is when we go to Kennebunkport. And the whole family would be there. Jeb would be there, George W., the grandchildren, everybody's there. They're real happy, they're going on vacation. And the president needs that. I mean, you know, and he never goes on vacation. He's got a military aide standing next to him with the football for codes for the new war. So tell me he's on vacation, but he's getting a little bit away. So I'm in the stateroom taking the handbags and making them there secure, and I leave and the two dogs follow me. I don't think anything of it. And later on, the president's walking around the airplane and Millie and Ranger's with me. I don't think anything of it. And that specific trip, I had to go up to the house in Kennebunkport, do something for Mrs. Bush. And so I'm at the gate. The president's in the back of the house moving his furniture around. And, you know, the grandkids are there. There's toys and riding toys and tents just like anybody else would have. And there's no order to it, you know. And so the president's there with his dogs. And I'm at the gate going through the Secret Service. The dogs run and see me. I still don't think anything of it. We got back on the airplane, and we're going back to Washington. And the President of the United States comes up to me and says quietly with me, he said, you know, Howie, I hate to admit it, but you're making me jealous with my dogs. That's the last thing I want. You know, I was flabbergasted. What do you mean, sir? He said, well, my dogs seem to like you more than they like me. I reached into my pocket and I said, sir, I got treats in my pocket. And the President of the United States thanked me for that. Because he thought the dogs actually liked me.
So he probably always carried treats in his pockets after that. See, they are just like us. They're just real people just like us. I remember once we were taking the girls up to camp up in New Hampshire and with Mrs. Laura Bush. And we were on the Gulfstream, which is the small jet that you saw pictures of. And they got off the airplane, and we all got to we're cleaning up the airplane and buttoning it up, as we call it. And I realized that one of the people forgot Mrs. Bush's dress. So I called the contact, and I said, hey, the Mrs. Bush forgot her dress, so I'm going to drop it by the hotel on my way to our hotel. And so I go to the hotel. They were staying at a lodge. So I go in and I go up to the 4th floor, and there's an agent there outside the elevator, and he knows me. So he goes, hey, Rich, how are you? And I go, good, I got Mrs. Bush's dress. And he goes, okay, go ahead, right down the hall. So I go to the end of the hall. Of course, I'm waiting for the assistant, and I knock on the door, and Mrs. Bush answered the door. And she says, hi, Rich, come on in. And I put the dress down, and I saw that she had some sandwiches there on the table. And I said, okay, ma'am, nice to see you tomorrow. And she goes, oh, have a sandwich. I know you haven't eaten. And I was like, no, I'm good, I'm okay. But, you know, just like us, people just like us, which is amazing, you know, caring for their dogs and, you know, having to wake them up, which I know you both had to do many times. And imagine when, you know, you don't like to wake your spouse up. So now imagine having to wake up the leader of the free world and what that must be like. Jeff, yesterday we had the opportunity to talk to you and also Colonel Darling, who was with President Bush on 9/11. Jeff was on board the airplane on 9/11. And it's a unique experience that you've all witnessed both yesterday and today, because there hasn't ever been a flight attendant to talk publicly about what it was like that day. So just briefly tell us what President Bush's mood was on the journey after everything back to Washington.
Well, of course, the president was very somber with what was going on. Two of our flight attendants met the president in the foyer area on the aircraft, and they had a very tender moment. They said a prayer with the president, and actually a tear was shed because it was a very emotional time. But the president was all about making sure that we knew who did this and trying to let the country know that we're going to be all right. The travels that I've done, I've been all over the world many times. People in the United States really do not understand how good we have it. We live in the best country in the world. And freedom is not free. So, and I tell them to thank a veteran every opportunity that you can.
And speaking of thanking a veteran, we are really lucky because I've got another brother in arm, another member of Sam Fox. Laurent and his family drove in. Laurent Watts, stand up, Laurent. Laurent was this man and I flew around the world many times over on Air Force Two, on the First Lady's plane, on presidential advance missions and presidential support missions. Laurent Watts was a communications operator, retired Air Force. He took care of all the phone calls, the internet, and everything for our nation's leaders for 3 administrations. So give it up for Laurent Watts for coming here.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. It's kind of an honor to get up here and see my buddies again. I haven't seen in 7 years, 7 or so years, and I really came up to see him because he's my brother. Really, I was going through training, and he was going through training, both at the same time, out at Andrews on the Gulf Streams and that. And then once we get qualified, we kind of split. We both do our missions. We kind of came back together on one special mission.
Yes, we did.
We had a special mission out there called SAP, Special Air Program, where we would take special, like Secretary of Defense, same people we fly, in a C-17, we take them downrange to the desert, usually during a USO tour.
And you know if there's celebrities on board, I'm going to be on board.
That's why we call you Hollywood. So anyways, we're all sharing stories here, so I'm going to share a quick one too. Most memorable one with me flying with Rich here is we had Kid Rock on the jet, and we had Admiral Mullen and the Misses on the jet.
Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Correct, Chairman of Joint Chiefs. And I'm in the comm module in the back, so I don't get to actually witness this, thank heavens. But if I remember correctly, I think you came back.
Yeah, I came back, and I said, you got to come out and see this. This is amazing.
Right, so anytime there's something wrong on the jet, I'm the one that has to call back to the base and beg forgiveness before they get wind of it. I basically had to call back to Andrews and let them know that Kid Rock mooned the chairman.
On the C-17, there's a round window that is up in the cockpit, and Kid Rock thought it would be really funny to show an in-flight movie of moons over Miami.
Yes, yeah, that's very true. And then when we get this, we call it a what was that? A hot rep. Yep. A hot rep. Anyways, we get this hot rep back, and then we find out that I think the missus was Kid Rock's name is Leroy, right? Yep. The missus says, "Oh, that's just Leroy being Leroy."
Yep.
You know him? What?
Thanks for being here, Laurent, and thank you for your service, brother. So the SAP missions are when we take an Airstream trailer and we load it onto a C-17, which is the biggest aircraft in the Air Force's inventory, and then we can fly our DVs or our VIPs in and out of the hot zones, Baghdad, Afghanistan, Iraq, places like that, and they can fly on those planes and be very comfortable because they're in an Airstream in a airplane that's really meant for cargo, not for passengers. But we give them the same level of service that these folks give on board the blue and white aircraft. So we do USO trips and we do other trips. Well, one of my favorite trips on a SAP mission was with Secretary Rumsfeld. And it was actually also the first time I flew Secretary Rumsfeld. So we go into we're going into Baghdad, and we just flew, I think it was something like 22 hours and 2 air refuels, and it's, he gets on board, and he goes right into the Airstream trailer. And I go in, and I said, "Hi, Mr. Secretary, do you need anything?" And he said, "Yeah, get me a Coke and warm it up." And I went, okay, and I went to the galley, and I got him a Coke, and then I put it in a glass, and I put it in the microwave, and I warmed it up. So I go into the cabin, and I put it down, and I said, "There you go, Mr. Secretary." He takes one drink, and he goes, "This is hot." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, I want it cold. I want it with ice. And I thought, and he goes, "And warm it up." Get me a Coke and warm it up. It's cold in here. Okay, go, Chief, go.
That's communications. That's communications. It was during the Reagan administration. We had a gentleman that was the chief of protocol of the United States of America, and he traveled with us. It was his last trip. And he used to, when he traveled with us, he would write a letter to the stewards and name them. And he was a great guy. So coming out of Hawaii, they put him on the backup with his daughter. That's the backup Air Force One. He had the whole airplane to himself. Gentleman that worked for me, Kevin Clark, was taking care of him. They had stewards on there. So the gentleman's on the airplane, and he says to Kevin Clark, "Can I go back into the staff area and take a picture?" Well, you're not supposed to take any pictures on the airplane, but he's been so nice to the crew over the years. Kevin goes up and talks to the pilot and said, "Hey, listen, the ambassador's been so nice. There's nothing classified back there. We'll let him take a picture." So the colonel says, "Yeah, okay, take a picture." Well, they landed Andrews, and Kevin's standing there at attention. The colonel's standing at attention, and the ambassador walks up with a big picture that he took off the wall. Yeah, he said, "Can I take a picture back in the staff area?" Okay? So the colonel's now scared, and Kevin says, "Don't worry, Howie will replace the picture." So, communication.
Communication is the key. I know you all have questions. I know you do. So let's walk around the room and please stand and speak right into the mic. Please stand.
When Air Force One flies, are there two planes that fly at the same time? One not knowing which one the president's on, and one knowing?
Jeff?
Usually there's two planes that fly. However, one is a backup aircraft. That backup aircraft is somewhere in the vicinity in the event that something happens. Because remember, safety, comfort, and reliability. If something happens to that one aircraft, that other aircraft has to swoop in and make sure that that operation continues to flow smoothly. And 9 times out of 10, if something like that did happen, the president didn't even know that we had switched that aircraft. So.
Hey, Rich.
Go ahead, Chief.
Let me add something to that. People don't you know, when they have the news, they'll say the president's on the road and he's going somewhere and it's costing us millions of dollars and all this other stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, if that airplane's not flying the president, it's flying. They got a train. We call it flying around the flagpole. So it doesn't cost us, but Air Force One comes in under budget, no matter what they'll say. Now, we're flying that 747, it's $40,000 an hour, okay? But the thing is that if it wasn't flying, working, at least the guys are working. If they're not working, that airplane's going to fly, it's going to cost money. That's the way it is because it has to. So it doesn't cost extra money for the president to go on vacation or the president to go on a trip. It's in this, and if you catered and chartered the same thing, it would be 4 times the price.
Who's got a question? I'll be right over.
Recently, my daughter and son-in-law traveled, and their flight, luckily they got to fly out because the Air Force One was going to be at the airport. So what is the protocol for all of that?
Well, the protocol is Air Force One, this is our country, this is his country, so he has that the priority. So when Air Force One is coming in, they want to clear out all other aircrafts because you have to be in a secure environment. Nobody else can be coming in flying. You just wanted to make sure that it is safe for the president. And in major airports, they will announce when the president is coming in. Everything else ceases, and then all other operations continue on.
Richard, I'd add to that, there's one thing and that all presidents miss when they leave office, and that's Air Force One. And that's because they're always number 1 for takeoff.
I'll share with you that I got to be the chief usher at President Herbert Walker Bush's funeral, and that my duties was to seat all the former presidents. And so when Mrs. Obama came in, I got a big hug, and then I said, "Oh, we really miss you at Andrews." And then she said, "Well, tell him that." So then the president was coming aboard, and I said, "Hey, Mr. President," and he said, "What were we talking about?" I said, "We missed you on the airplane." And he said, "Let me tell you something. I miss having my own plane."
What were your quarters like on the plane?
On the 707 was limited. The 747, it doesn't have a lot of beds. The seats recline. There's 75 passengers and about 27 crew members. And the flight attendants with the 747, I was able to win the argument. The flight attendants worked with the engineers to design the layout of the airplane. And it's because they work with it. Instead of an engineer just design it, it looks good. So we did the galleys and the chairs and stuff like that. There's, in the front of the airplane is a private executive stateroom for the president and the first lady. There's 2 couches that pull out into beds, and they're nicer than the ones you'd have at home, comfortable. And then there's a desk area with where they both can sit and work at. Then there's I think as you go back, there's the bathroom area. It's got 2 sinks and a shower, and President Carter didn't have a shower. So we can imagine we flew all the way to India, and he got off the airplane, went to work, and he didn't have a shower. This is not a luxury. This is something they appreciate. So there's a bathroom. Then there's the executive stateroom, which we call the Oval Office for the president. Then there's a medical annex. And in the medical annex, there's 2 bunks and for somebody if they get sick or things of that nature. Then you have the galley. Then you have a VIP staff area, guest area, a VIP area. That's for cabinet level people. There's 4 chairs. And they can turn to the wall, and the desk comes down so they can work. Then there's the working staff. No, there's the conference room, and where they can come in and meet and have meetings. And then there's a working staff area. Then there's the VIP guest area. Then there's the Secret Service area, and then there's the press. And I'd also like to bring out that the press that fly on the airplane, they don't fly for free. They pay a coach fare wherever we're going plus $1. And there's something else that you may or may not know. Everybody on that airplane, I gave them a bill. There was a bill went to President Carter, a bill went to Jody Powell for the meals. Now, whatever meals I spent, to say it's a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whatever I spent on that breakfast, it was divided by the number of people on the airplane. But if you didn't eat the meal, we wouldn't charge you, because they're getting per diem. Per diem is what you get when you travel throughout the world, so they shouldn't be eating food free for the taxpayers. So everybody on the airplane, I sent a bill to Chelsea, I sent a bill to the president. Now, if you have a VIP guest on the airplane, chances are there's a fund that's going to take care of that. So it's a business office. It's very nice and very comfortable, but it's a business office. I run an airport in southeastern North Carolina. I have people from all over the world that come in and fly, and their executive airplanes are nicer than Air Force One.
A lot of people don't realize that everybody has to pay. Every passenger that we fly with, we give everybody a bill. It's all part of the mission and everything. So they pay just like we would all have to pay.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say this is so fascinating, and I'm so glad that I learned that you were going to be here today. And so I have, and I don't want to take any light off of you guys, but this is where I'm so excited because I am a retired Master Sergeant Boomacher. So I've refueled a C-17 a time or two, and it's so awesome. I have a wonderful Air Force One story. Is when it was in 2008 when President Bush was on his way out, and they were on their way through Alaska. I was in the Alaska Air National Guard, and they stopped at Eielson on their way to the Olympics. And I had the most wonderful, in my opinion, visit with President Bush, and he signed my boom patch, and I still have it on my dresser, and it was awesome. But one of the questions that I have is, I know that the Entourage and the other support planes are refueled, but is Air Force One, we don't ever refuel Air Force One, or can you talk about that?
What's the question?
One of you guys got that?
Say the question again.
In-flight refuel, you were asking?
You talking about on the ground, or are you talking about in the air?
Yeah.
One of the number one questions we always get. Jeff?
So Air Force One is in-flight refuelable. However, it will never be done unless there is something going on in the world that the president cannot land.
In-flight refueling, and my boom will attest to this, is the most dangerous aspect of flight.
Let me add to that. I was on the airplane before they received it. The interior was done, but the outside was like a green paint job, and we were practicing with the airplane. And one of the greatest pilots in the world, Colonel Belcito, was flying the airplane, and I walked up in the cockpit. There's a DC-10 in front of us, and he's going like this, and there's a big tube that comes down and lays right in front of you on the outside of the airplane. And the Air Force One is doing this, and I look at the best pilot in the world, and he is sweating bullets. And I said, boys, don't do this with me and the president on the airplane. So they don't, unless they have to.
Hey, Howie, can you talk a little bit about the day President Reagan was shot?
Yeah, the day President Reagan was shot, ma'am, the day President Reagan was shot, I was playing racquetball at Andrews, and we found out about it, and it was, there were several things that happened. First of all, people didn't know, and even the people in the White House didn't know how bad it was. He was worse than people think. When the First Lady walked into the room where the president was, Reagan looked up and said, "I didn't duck." And then he looked up at the surgeon and said, "I hope there's a Republican in here." Yeah, it was a very serious thing, and of course, and the other thing was, and you heard about Al Haig said, "I got it." Okay, well, let me give you what really happened. That day, President Bush, the vice president, was in Phoenix, Arizona on 972, one of our airplanes, and the radios, the secure voice went out. When the vice president can't talk on a secure voice, he's out of the loop. So the people in the White House were really upset. I mean, they were worried about the president. They were running around kind of crazy. The vice president's out of the loop. They got nobody, and Al Haig said, "I got it." Well, he was the chief of staff. He was the Supreme Allied Commander for President Carter in Europe. He didn't mean he was the next president. It was taken completely out of context, and they never reported the fact that President Bush, Vice President Bush, was out of the loop, so to speak. So.
Okay, we have a question back here.
Do you remember Bush coming in '91? Marshfield has the longest running 4th of July parade on this side of the Mississippi. Do you remember that?
Yes, I was on the aircraft with him. Yes, very much so.
And then years later, Mrs. Bush was a guest here at the Cherry Blossom Festival. How many of you are here for that? And I was on the airplane to bring them here, not knowing eventually I was going to end up here too.
So my question is regarding your flight crew. How many people are usually make up the flight crew for Air Force One?
So
or any of those planes?
On a typical Air Force One crew, you might have 25 crew members. That could be security. You have a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, engineers, one or two engineers, and then you have communications operators, security, and then 10 flight attendants on each aircraft. So whenever we're going overseas, it can go up to 30 crew members, but usually we'll have, usually 72 is the max amount of packs whenever we're going overseas, passengers. So.
My question is, did you guys have any presidents on board of 9/11?
Yeah, Jeff was on board on 9/11 with President Bush. Yeah.
Yes.
Who else? Oh, yes.
She said that they didn't hear that. The question that he asked was, did we have a president on board on 9/11? And I was on board with the president on 9/11. That was one of the longest days of our life. And just to experience that, if you get the book and you read the story, I get goosebumps every time I just think about it, because 9/11, everybody in this room can tell you where they were when they heard that something happened, a plane flew into the World Trade Center. And for me being on that plane, I was on Air Force One, and I was in the forward galley, and the first thing that I thought of was, is it foggy? How can a plane fly into the World Trade Center? So I go into the conference room, and we're looking at Katie Couric and Matt Lauer watching the Today Show, and it's a clear day. But when that second plane hit, the crew immediately knew that our country is under attack. We got a briefing, and we went to our positions and went about protecting that president.
My question is, how many, did your family have to make a lot of sacrifices because of the story about, is that your first child?
That was my second child.
Your wife must be an angel.
Well, yeah, early on, up until the Bush administration, and President Carter is a very civilized flyer. We flew at different economic summits and things of that nature. President Reagan came in, and we would fly, and campaigning every 2 years, and then you fly to economic summits. George H. Bush came in. We flew more with George H. Bush in 6 months than we flew with President Reagan in 8 years. Our joke was, doesn't this guy know he's got a Secretary of State to do this stuff? So, and it got worse.
Jeff?
It got worse.
And at our retirements, whenever we retired, they gave us so many different awards, but they also gave our spouses awards because our spouses
Yes.
were the #1 supporters. We could not do what we did if they were not there taking care of the home front. And we had to have that peace of mind because they knew that we were doing a very important job, taking care of the President of the United States. And we could not do that if our minds were back home worrying about, are the bills going to be paid? Does the grass need to be cut? What have you? And they took care of home, and so they got the award also.
Every retiree will tell you that their retirement ceremony is about their family, because it is. It's about the sacrifice that the family give for the military member to do what they need to do.
My oldest daughter was a flight attendant for a commercial airline, and then she went to general aviation and flew privately for Apex Oil. And so I know when they had to go overseas, she said, I can't sleep. I'm not supposed to sleep. Do you guys sleep?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a mission with President Bush. We got up we left at 7 in the morning. That means I got up at 3. And then we flew to Daytona Beach, sat on the ground for 3.5 hours. Then we flew to Charlotte, North Carolina, sat on the ground for 2.5 hours. Then we flew to Andrews Air Force Base, sat on the ground for 3.5 hours, and he went jogging while we were on the ground there. Then we flew to Munich, Germany. That was a 10-hour flight. And then we sat on the ground for 5 hours, and then we left there and went to Munich, Germany, and I was serving a heavy, gorgeous dinner on the way. That was 38 hours into the mission. And remember, I hired people that could play and get along with each other. They got off the airplane. They were still friendly and happy with each other. I gave them a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, flight attendants don't sleep and we don't eat.
This is not addressed to the people here, but participating in their first Cherry Blossom Festival, it's obvious that Marshfield is a magnificent collection of retired military. How does this happen?
Well, it actually doesn't, because we're not from Marshfield. But we get to be here, for all different reasons. And, my story, comes from Sally Raines, who got me involved and actually introduced me to this crazy reverend that you might see running around here. And so this is my 5th year. And then these two are here because I roped them into it. And I said, if you come, there's these most beautiful people that are just exactly what the United States of America is about. And you have to come and meet them.
And Rich is our brother, and we did it for you, but initially we did it for Rich, because we would do that, okay? I'd like to say to the Master Sergeant in the back of the room, my wife was one of 8 only female E8s in the United States Air Force. And she was supposed to make chief, but her father got sick, so she got out. And they said, what are you doing? You're supposed to be a role model. She said, thank you. Well, one of 8. She was also the administrative assistant to President Carter during his whole administration. She was also administrative assistant to Ronald Reagan. She was with President Carter when they went to, we brought President Carter down to Georgia, and we left him off, and we flew back to Washington next, and Reagan gave him the airplane to go meet the hostages. They flew back down. I didn't have to go. My wife went with them. And then they flew all the way to Germany, sat on the ground for 8 hours. They flew all the way back to Georgia and took them off. So that was a long day. But my wife was the administrative assistant to President Carter and President Ford. So
I've got two questions. The first is there Wi-Fi on the plane on a 10-hour flight? If you got all these passengers, people want to watch movies and stream. Is it encrypted to like a satellite or a ground thing, or how does that work?
Well, our communications operators, that's one of the problems that they found out about Air Force One on 9/11. Air Force One is a very sophisticated aircraft, but we found that there were some technical difficulties that we needed to upgrade. So lessons learned on Air Force One on 9/11. Now they have the best high-tech Wi-Fi. Those communications operators, they are working diligently to get signals as we're going along. They know the next place that they're going to get the best signal and what have you. So they have a job that's like very serious.
I want you to know when you cell phone, that's baloney. they use it. That's because initially when they had the cell phones, the cell phone companies went to the Congress and said they can't charge you when you're in the air because they couldn't figure it out. And plus, I guess on the airlines, they don't want everybody on the phone talking. But if you get to a certain altitude, they don't work. But we all use cell phones on airplanes.
Second question, you talked about family and spouses and retirement, how important that was. Was there a higher percentage of men or women that were hired that were married versus single? Did they want the stability? You'd mentioned you don't want to worry about the bills being paid, the lawn being cut. Do you want that stability, or do you want a bunch of single people running around that may be with other people? There may be a security breach that way.
Some of them started married. They did. They started married. Jeff, what do you got?
Yeah, basically you wanted the best people that could do the job, that could get along with each other, whether they were married or single. And with that comes the responsibility. If you know that you're going to be away for 30 days, you know that you're going to put everything in line before you leave. And you have those contingencies set up. Okay, if I'm going to be gone, okay, so you have a babysitter, and then this is your babysitter's backup. With my wife, she had, if I was not going to be there, she had a backup. And that day, her backup's son hit his head on the table, and he was at the emergency room. So she was there by herself. So I needed a backup to the backup to the backup.
We have the last question right here.
You all have had such exciting lives. Have you raised your children to have exciting lives?
Have you raised your children to have exciting lives?
Well, absolutely, and we try to give them as many experiences as they possibly can. The unique thing about my children at Andrews Air Force Base, now they're all older and they have families themselves. They were on Air Force One. I would say to them, "What do you remember about Air Force One?" They said, "The candy bag."
Jeff?
They took it for granted, and now that they're older, they said, "My God, I was on Air Force One, and I did this and did that." So, yeah, we do that. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jeff.
And definitely for me also, one of the wonderful things was each year the air crew would get invited down to the White House. So each year I'd take my wife. Well, one year I said, I'm going to take my daughter. So I was the captain of the Air Force racquetball team. At that time, my youngest daughter was ranked number 2 in the country. My oldest daughter was ranked number 10 in the country, and I was number 1 in the country in our age divisions. So when I met the president, they come through, grip and grin, and go. So the line is going, and then somebody said, the line stopped. What's going on? Why'd the line stop? They said, well, Jeff is in there with the president and his daughter talking about racquetball. It was wonderful.
The key to a successful military family, I always say, is when you're home, be home. And be with your family, and I think that's what we all try to do, and it's very important. Laurent brought his family and his grandson here today to see all of us and be with us. So, Chief and Jeff, we thank you so very much for being a part of this festival. It is just an amazing place. Chief, thank you for coming before both of us and really doing what we long to do. So thank you. Thank these gentlemen very much for their service to us.